Welcome to the Concrete 101 for Polishers conference call. My name is Adrienne, and I'll be your operator for today's call. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. Later, we'll conduct a question-and-answer session. During the question-and-answer session, if you have a question, please press star, then 1 on your touch-tone phone. Please note this conference is being recorded. I'll now turn the call over to Tom Bykowski. Tom Bykowski, you may begin.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining. I want to go through a quick snippet of the agenda today. Let's see here. Okay, so today we're going to talk briefly about how important a pre-pour meeting is, the content of your meeting and who should attend, tools to help you out, tools that can make your life easy, and when to use these tools and when not to, and the finishing practices as it relates to polishing the floor, common finishing issues and how to avoid them, why they happen and a root cause, how to correct on the front end, and what good looks like in a placement. We're going to get into curling a little bit and how to deal with it. What is flat? We'll talk about FF and FL numbers. We're going to touch a little bit on mixed designs. I got some examples of some pretty solid mixed designs, and we'll walk through them a little bit on, hey, you don't have to be a mixed design expert, but you definitely want to, key into a few points that are going to help you through some things to avoid some issues down the road. We're going to touch base on timeline on curl, and at the end we'll do some questions and answers and what good looks like. So we're going to move forward here. Who needs to be at a pre-pour meeting? In my opinion, this is a pre-pour meeting that we put on that we had roughly 150 people attend to make sure everyone was on the same page for the importance of this placement. So when it comes to who should be at a pre-pour meeting, in my opinion, it's anybody that's going to be involved with that placement and have any type of input on it. This is a standard pre-pour that we have with our company. Keep in mind this, in my opinion, you guys are seeing a slideshow of it, but I call it a living document that we amend and add to and revise constantly when we come up with issues of concern. I put this slideshow together probably a year and a half ago, and I want to say I'm on revision 18 right now with this document. So there's been some changes, some that wouldn't relate to this presentation, but constantly updating it. So you can see on the document, you got your mandatory invites, your owners, your architects, your concrete contractor, concrete supplier. I'm not going to read through all of them, but in my opinion, the most important ones on here that you need to be on the same page with when dealing with a concrete slab and creating that canvas for the polisher would be your concrete contractor, your concrete supplier, and your polishing contractor. These three groups of people have to work in unison, and anything that needs to be discussed, brought up for the route to success needs to be talked about at this meeting. I would suggest having this meeting, you don't want to do it the day before placement. If anything, you want to do this at least a minimum of 2 weeks before you're going to do your first test placement. And it's going to give you that time frame because there's going to be things that come up that you're going to have to dig into, and you're going to have to roll up your sleeves and get to work on. So I would advise a 2-week duration so that way you can revise some things and come to a consensus for success. All right? You're going to want to do an introduction, a brief scope review, your pre-slab discussion. I mean, these are all of the things we're going to kind of bullet through here and how they affect you. But this is a pretty good format to cover everything you want on that placement, all right, for preparing for your polish, okay? If you go to the third page here, I mean, it's going to give you your doc releases, specifications, any RFIs or pending changes that are out there. When you're going through any pending changes, all right, you're going to want to take a look at, the future design changes. Hey, they may not be talking about polished floor at the time, but it may come to light. So there may be some areas that are planned to be polished. Hey, we know how the industry works. People love the look of it, and eventually most of the building becomes polished. So with that being said, You're going to want to talk about areas where sometimes the owner wants to get a little bit, I don't want to say cheap, so I'll say frugal, and save some money where they can, which we all understand. And then they want you to, hey, 6 months down the road to a year, make the change and polish that area. If you're not prepared for it, your chance of success is limited. So again, these are all things you want to talk about. And again, like I say, for the placement guy, this gives you some approximate areas. In your pre-slab discussion, hey, you definitely, hey, we don't want to shortchange safety. That's where you're going to want to talk about everything that's going to affect your day for the placement and for the polish process. All right. Site logistics, site access, your safety data sheets for anything that's coming on that site. You want to get into your equipment requirements for safety. Are you having scrubbers? Are you using biodiesel, propane, electric? You want to talk about all these things as you're sitting at the table together. Something that always comes up to me is, hey, you got a polisher coming in there, if he's not running propane and he's running electricity, who's covering the tie-in? Who's taking care of all that? All these things need to be discussed. It's not going to be a meeting that you're just going to run through. A good pre-pour meeting is going to take you probably 4 hours to get through. All right? Subgrade and subbase. May not seem that important to a polisher, but hey, take a good look at it, because there's a lot of facts out there, not just statistics, but anything on that subgrade and subbase that you do transfers through and affects that slab. All right, so if I have a lot of rutting, if I have a lot of ununiform surfaces, if I haven't proof rolled, all of this is going to affect you as a polisher when you come to that slab, because though it may not show in hour 72 after that placement, on day 28 or day 68, or if you're coming in there 4 to 6 months later, a lot of things can happen due to not necessarily the concrete or slab itself, but due to the subbase that's going to affect you. All right, you could get some major curling out of it, cracking, a lot of things can happen there. So I would want to know a lot about the subbase, the density, how they're testing it, how uniform it's going to be, and really kind of run through that. As for a vapor retarder, hey, that's important too. Are you putting a underlay under there, a 10 mil, a 15 mil? Are you taping the joints? Are you taping all the penetrations? That, again, is going to, anytime you put down a vapor retarder, whether it's any brand, I could go through all the brands, but we won't. It's going to affect your curl and shrinkage on that slab, and as a polisher, it's going to and we'll get into it later in the slideshow, it's going to affect your timeline on when you're going to want to get in there, because there's some things that you're not going to avoid that are going to come up. So you kind of want to know, hey, does it have a vapor barrier or not? If it doesn't have a vapor barrier, what are my soil borings? Where's my moisture content in that soil? How much is it retaining? Because that's going to affect your curl too. So just some, hey, I know it's a lot of information, but just some things to be aware of as you're going through a pre-pour. All right? Then, hey, you briefly want to get into your formwork and embeds and isolation joints. Make sure the elevations work for you. Make sure, as a polisher, when you're sitting in there with your place and finish contractor and you're reviewing all of this stuff, as these things come up, it's going to give you a comfort level of their level of expertise, all right, and how they're going to hold their elevations and benches. So when you get out there to polish, you have that uniform surface. So you don't have a lot of aggregate at your edges and then a nice, sand or cream polish outside of that, depending on what you're looking for. So, hey, formwork, isolation and expansion joint and embeds, all important. Who's verifying them? What's the tolerances on them? Who's doing an as-built on them afterwards? So you know that the location they were put in at right the first time versus having to deal with it, months down the road. Reinforcement requirements. You're going to want to sit through and hey, is it a a resteel mat that's going in? Is it welded wire fabric? Is it steel fiber or polyfiber? Hey, polyfiber, and they're asking you to do a sand polish. You as polishers out there probably know that's not going to look very good, right? That's a good time to bring it up to the owner or the architect. Ask the question why. Walk them through what your thoughts are on it. And kind of bring up that discussion. Again, everything in this pre-pour is for a recipe for success at the end of the project, right? Now we're going to get a little bit more into detail here when we get into the mix designs. All right, so this you really got to kind of focus in on, right? Your compressive strength, right? I like to see a 4,000 psi on just about everything. I don't think it's a good point to go over that because it's going to be over designed anyway, and you're probably going to break around 5,500 is a good break. Some way over design, and I've seen some slab mixes that sit over 28 days and they're breaking at 7,000 psi. This is when you need to sit with your concrete supplier in that meeting and get a break history of the mix he's going to be pouring, and he should supply that for every project because you got to have a break history on a mix design to show that it's been solidified that it's going to work. So he's got to have some sort of history and testing on it. So you kind of want to get those breaks on the front end, because where it's going to help you is, say you're in a project and the place and finish guy is going to be there the first 3 months and you're not coming in until walls are up, studs are up, and you're going to polish this thing 6 months later. Well, if the break history shows me that mix is coming in on a 7-day break at 4,000 to 4,500 psi, but in 28 days I'm hitting 7,000 psi, that's going to change your cut factor. It's going to change your, for all intents and purposes, it could change your price, because you could be pricing this job to cut a 5,000 psi mix, and you're breaking at 7. It's going to be a lot harder to cut. You're going to eat up a lot more diamond. You may have to introduce water. Just a lot of things you want to look at when you're looking at these mix designs. PSI would be my number one. What's my history on it, and where am I going to end up at? Another thing you want to do in your pre-placement meeting, talk with your placement contractor, talk with the owner, and as a polisher, make sure you're testing and monitoring an air test on all of your slab-on-grade or slab-on-deck mix designs, all right? If you're required to have a 2% or under, in most areas, that's what you want for a mix design. You want to be under 2%. You want to monitor that because, hey, a lot of these mid-range and high-range water reducers actually induce air, and if you're not testing and monitoring as a polisher, hey, when you get into a mix that's got air in it, it's going to be a little weaker, a little easier to cut, but you're going to have a lot of voids in it. You might have to get into grouting, so hey, you're going to want to monitor an air test throughout your project. Regardless of it, a pavement mix design for exterior is going to call for 6+% of air. Anything interior should be 2% or under, or 3% or under. So you want to monitor that, because that's a good case to bring up to the owner if you've got some entrapped air, not necessarily entrained, but if you get entrapped air in there from your additives, it could be a real problem down the road. So you definitely want to keep that in mind. You also probably want to ask for a copy of the batch tickets, batch or mixed design tickets that they deliver with every truck. We typically on a placement log our mixed design tickets with our pre-pour pour card and keep it all on file and share that with either our polisher or our owner if they ask for it. We have copies of it. And what that's going to do is if you come to an area of floor, and it's going to happen, guys and gals, that you can't figure it out, right? Why is it cutting like this? Why is it not cutting for me? Why is it, have some striping to it? Why is there discolor to it? Typically, you will find that in the batch tickets for that placement. So logging that material and tracking it, and when I say materials, I mean the tickets themselves, what placement they were for, the timeline of it. If you have that information, you could take that out to the pour, and you could almost go truck by truck, and it'll take you right to that spot you have a problem with, and you'll know what's going on with that ticket. So, I mean, hey, these are things you might want to ask for from your place finish guy to keep you in the loop on, because it's going to help you out. All right? Okay, this one, interesting, and we'll get to it in some slides I have coming up. All right? I know a lot of this is not that exciting yet, but trust me, it gets a little bit better as we go on here. But enclosures and climate control, all right? We have a rule here at Barton Mallow that if we don't have a roof, walls, we don't pour. That's probably 95% true 95% of the time, right? So there is always that one-off owner that has to have something done. But again, be prepared for it, right? So then you got to key into your weather. You got to key into if you need wind breaks. You know, hey, you got to look at things a lot differently. Me, myself, I want a building, I want it roofed, I want it weather tight. I'm not really real concerned about a perfectly climated control one because you're going to get into some other factors with that. But I want a good chance at success. Without some of these facets, my chance of success goes way down. So these are things you want to know, you know. If you're pouring in a colder climate, right, you want to make sure that if you're pouring in the winter months, hey, I have a clean air supply. I want to stay away from slab carbonization. That's when you're burning inside a building without a clean air supply. And hey, lived it once in my career, and I don't ever want to live it again, but the slab has a tendency to do a lot of dusting. It's got a carbonized top to where it's very weak, very porous, and you got a lot of mitigation in there if just a simple, correct type of heater is not used in a cold climate, okay? Climate changes. Hey, a lot of times we get into two mix designs in our area. If I've got a large project that's going to start, and again, I'm in the Michigan area, I'm going to start a project in August, and I'm not going to finish my placements until January. Throughout that project, my mix design as a place finish contractor is going to change. I need to let my polisher know the changes I'm going to make, because you're going to switch some of the characteristics of that mix, but you don't want to change the overall look at the end of what you guys are trying to achieve when you're polishing that mix. You don't want a big color difference. You don't want a big gloss or shine reflectivity difference, and then a lot of that's going to be weighed out in your mix design. So again, if it comes up in a pre-pour that your place finish contractor is going to make some mix changes because of seasons, whether it's hot climate or cold climate, you need to know what the changes are and how it's going to affect the aesthetics of that mix at the end. All right? Placement requirements. Hey, it's good to know how they're placing. I always, hey, if I've got a big slab job, I want to direct discharge every chance possible because it's coming out of the truck. I don't have a secondary piece of equipment. If I got to use a concrete pump, I got to get into different types of aggregates. I got to add in some different admixes to make my pumpability a little bit easier, especially on slab on grade. You can get some cream pockets. You can get some things happening. So I like direct discharge. You're going to have to use a concrete pump at times. Just make sure your mix design reflects pumping. And we'll get into that. There's certain things you do for that. But again, hey, always ask the question how they're placing, right? Finishing requirements, okay? In a pre-pour meeting, and hey, I've sat through a lot of them, this is kind of, to me, the tell-all, be-all for how qualified your place finish people are, okay? They should be able to be confident with their answers on all these and rattle them off pretty easily. But we're going to get into finish types, all right? If I'm a polisher and I'm coming in there and I've got to do a nice sand polish, nice and even, I'm probably going to want a steel trowel. I don't need a burnish floor because it's going to be way too hard to cut, and it's just going to slow my production down. So you want to kind of go through, hey, it's receiving a polish. You guys need to talk about what works for you, and then definitely suggest a mock-up pour. Always do a mock-up pour. and do a mock-up grind on it. I would not move forward until your place finish guy is comfortable with what he's pouring and the mix design he has chosen, and that you guys are comfortable with what you're polishing. You know, FF and FL requirements, you want to know those. What are the overalls, the minimums, define local minimums if called out? Are they laser screeding? Is there a dry shake topping? If there is, you want to really get into the means and methods of that. We'll go through that in some slides coming up. Evaporation retarders, you know, hey, everything you want to get into, saw cutting, that's a big one. I mean, especially if you're polishing, you know, you're going to want to know what kind of equipment they're going to use, and make sure that it's not going to leave a disaster for you. Hey, it may take care of their mitigation of cracking and everything on the front end, but if I come out to a job and I got to polish it and the saw cut looks like a zipper, that's not really helping anybody out. You know, so these are all things, again, you know, just keynotes to talk about during this pre-placement conference. And again, I know I'm moving a little bit fast here. I feel like I'm on a timeline, but we'll have time for questions and answers at the end. I'm hoping that you guys go through these conferences as a company. So just, if not, we can get into that after and how maybe you could push forward to start doing these. Subsequent floor finishes. Hey, right on there, you got it listed. Is it a polished floor? Yes. You know, that's a perfect time to start talking about what you guys need. You know, and obviously you've got just a densified, a sealed, and epoxy coated floor, because this pre-pour is designed for, you know, more than just polishing, but anytime that comes up, these are all leading indicators on when to start talking about what you need and work through these issues. Curing requirements. You know, hey, as a polisher, I guarantee you're probably not going to want to see a curing compound. I'm typically going to want to see a wet cure. But, you know, you're going to want to know the duration, how long it's going to be down. Are the people qualified that are putting it down? Have they used it before? What's their success rate? I mean, you want some comfort level with that, right? Slab access and restriction. Hey, if I'm polishing a building and I'm not going to be in there for 3 to 4 months and the plumber's ahead of me, is he going to set his pipe threading machine right in the center of a bay that gets polished with no protection underneath, and I'm going to have an oil stain that I'll never get away from through the life of that building? These are things you want to talk about, right? How we're going to protect that for the success of the placement and the success of the polish after the placement. All right. Joint fillers. Goes without saying, my minimum concrete cure time is the polisher doing the joint filler, is the place finish guy doing the joint filler. Are the two compatible for what's going on for the, you know, i.e. polished floor? Are we taping the joints? Are we using a stripper on the joints? You know, all of these things need to be talked about during the pre-placement, again, so we have that success at the end of the project. Coordination with other trades. Hey, most pre-pours, I'll have the plumber, the electrician, everyone else in there, at least, you know, one from their group, and I want that commitment from them that the floor drains are going to be set at the designated elevations we all decide on. The cleanouts, all right? Prime example on cleanouts. Been to projects before, all the cleanouts were set to finish floor. The flat work guy goes in there and they're tight as ever, right? They're not low, they're not high, they're perfect. We're getting an aggregate polish. Aggregate polish, I'm going to cut that surface down just enough where now that cleanout's high. These are things you got to talk about when you're in there, right? Am I doing an aggregate polish, a cream polish, a sand polish? How deep is my cut? You know, again, all needs to be coordinated with all trades to make sure we have that success at the end of the project. The last thing you want to get into is finger pointing, because once you go there, everything falls apart. So if you're going to finger point, this is your time to finger point during this conference, okay? Testing and acceptance. Hey, you're going to want to get into, you know, who is doing all of your testing on the project, who the reports are getting distributed to, the frequency of the testing. Again, you know, if you look at test frequency and standard, air slump temperature, right? all three of those I'm going to want on every single placement. Frequency, typically depending on the size of the slabs, 50 yard would be like a typical test. If I'm placing smaller placements, doing a 4-inch slab where 50 yards like my max of what I'm placing, I'm probably going to get at least 2 tests in there. So, maybe every 15 to 20 yards, get a test on the truck. And again, the report distribution, acceptance. You want to have a post-placement sign-off, and who's going to be the authority to sign off on that placement that it's correct? Is it an owner's rep, and are they agreeing to everything we're talking about during this pre-placement meeting, right? Defects. Don't avoid the defects. I'll tell you right now, I've been doing this about 35 years, and defects are on every job. I like to think of us as the best, but I can't remember one job where I didn't have that one straight crack. Curling, you're always going to deal with curling. The guy that finds a cure for it, he'll be a rich man. But again, talk about the defects. What's acceptable? As a polisher, can you deal with an 1/8-inch crack? Do you need something smaller? Do we have to get into some chemical additives for shrinkage to help out? All these things need to be talked about, right? And then, again, getting into the schedule and sequence, test placement, test placement, test placement. Always do a test placement with a test grind on it. Make sure everybody buys into it before you go jump into a big slab and everybody's upset, all right? Get all the bugs worked out early, and you'll be on the road to success there. Minimum duration between adjacent placements. Hey, my rule of thumb, I typically don't like to place right up against another slab the following day. I like to give it a little bit of time in between, just to allow for that little bit of initial shrinkage to start. You'll end up with a little bit of a tighter joint at the end. That's my personal preference. Yes, you can pour right up against an adjacent placement if need be. Some people want you to wait 7 days. Hey, that's going to be a little bit driven by the owner. But again, think about what you're trying to get to and talk with them and work with them on that. And then, of course, always have a placement plan to follow. Your place and finish contractor should have all of his placements mapped out and planned in a sequence. And as a polisher, you're going to want to see that plan and sequence, because if I'm polishing behind a place finish guy, I want to follow that because I can optimize my cut, right? I don't want to start to where it's, maybe not the longer cure time and I'm cutting real easy, so I'm using a certain set of diamonds and resins, and I work myself backward, not knowing his sequence, and I get to the longer cured slabs, and I'm going to fight it all the way through. So you kind of want to be, in on that sequence that he's got laid out for you and the durations of when you're going to be placing. So now we're going to get into some of the tools of the trade, all right, for achieving flatness, all right? These are 3 very typical tools you'll see out there. Every one of these tools can help you as a polisher, and every one of these tools can hurt you as a polisher. So we're going to go through a couple examples of when to use them and when not to use them, and what the tools are mainly for. So this is an edge tamp or a jitterbug. Typically on this tool right here, if I need to get myself a little bit of cream on an existing edge, you're basically going to take that tool and either on you're going to be standing on a subgrade, or you're going to be standing on a leading edge of a placement you had done previously. And as the screed goes by, or if you're striking off by hand or whatever, you're going to take this tool and you're basically going to tamp that concrete to bring that cream up, so you've got a little bit more workability with it, all right? So now that's great if you're going for that sand polish, because right on the edge is where I find this tool most beneficial, because your curl is going to happen right on the edge. So if I'm trying to avoid any aggregate exposure, the more cream I have on that edge, the better it is for me, because that slab, if it curls an 1/8 inch and I don't have that cream layer or coverage, I could get to that aggregate pretty fast. So this is a tool that's going to help me avoid that, and avoid that timeline with the curl to keep my edge a little bit of extra cream on it. Now here's the downside to it. If I'm going after an aggregate exposed polish, you don't even want to see this on the job, because all it's going to do is prolong your cut. You're going to cut a lot deeper to get through that cream to get to the aggregate. So if you're doing an aggregate exposure, you don't want to use this. If you're doing something a little bit, whether it's cream or salt and pepper, this tool is going to help get you there, especially on the edge. Definite benefit there. Roller bug, basically the same as the jitterbug, but this is for getting out on a floor, wide open spaces. You're going to want to run this behind either your laser screed or your, if you're hand rodding or striking off or using a magic screed, which is a vibratory, man-driven screed, anything that you're striking off with, this is going to do the same as the jitterbug. But again, it's going to give you additional cream on the surface. It helps your place finish guy with his finishing methods. I won't get into that. I'm going to stick to the polish part of it. But on the polish part of it, it gives you that initial extra amount of cream, all right? But again, if I'm doing an aggregate exposure, this is going to make it really hard to get there, and it's going to take a little more time. So again, if you're on a job and you're with your placement contractor and he's telling you how he's going to use a edge tamp and a roller bug on everything he does, and it's calling for an aggregate exposure, you're going to want to talk to him, right? You're going to want him to change his process to help you both succeed at this project, right? So, and if you're on a job where you want a very even sand polish, and he doesn't have these two tools, you might want to talk to him about getting them and convince him to use them to help you through, your success, right? So it's, you got to keep that in mind when you're going to these pre-pours and listen closely and ask the questions on what they're using with tooling. Okay, so a check rod. I do like a check rod. It's very undamaging. You got to keep an eye on it because they do tend, if they're older, they can tend to get a little bow in the center and be counterintuitive to what you're trying to do. So you want to make sure the guys are checking it in the morning, making sure that it's flat. But basically, it's like a straight edge or a 2x4 laying on the flat, all right? And this one doesn't have it, but most of them, if you look at, let's see, I can't find my pointer here. There it is. If you look at these ends of the board right here, there's typically a rod that'll go from here to here, kind of like a highway straight edge or a cutter. You can get a rod adapter there. It'll keep them from flexing and bending on you. But this is a really good tool for checking flat for the placement contractor. This is an early indicator that if you have an issue out there, you'll see it right away because you'll see an air gap under that straight edge. And typically they're 8 to 10, 12 foot's pushing it, but usually 8 to 10 feet long. So if you do the right lap and everything, it's going to give you a really flat floor, helps the polisher out where he doesn't have any issues with any type of deviation in the slabs, right? Now, the one I will caution you on is the bump cutter, all right? The only time I will ever use a bump cutter is when super flat is more advantageous than the polish. All right. If I have to hit a very high FFFL number, there will be a bump cutter. If I have a polished floor with that very high FFFL number, we will have a discussion about maybe having some, I like to call them bald spots, stone spots, because this bump cutter is going to cut and move that cream, and I'm going to wield it any way I can to get the flattest floor I can. It's not going to help the polisher because I'm displacing that cream and I'm making it uneven to get my flat surface. So this is a very important discussion with the owner on what's more important, the look of the polish or the flatness of the floor. And if they're going flatness of the floor, then they have to understand as a polisher, if I'm running a bump cutter to achieve my flatness, there's only so much I can do as a polisher because I'm dispersing that cream, and you're not going to have an even surface to be polishing the cream layer. All right, it'll be flat as heck, but you will not have that even undersurface, right? You may make a pass and hit stone on one part and all cream on the other. So be cautious of that, all right? This is an example, again, like I said, hey, good example of you can see the laser screed. That's the front end. He's running the placement. You're following it with a nice long channel float, so that's going to help you out with your flatness. Then they're coming in and they're doing an early break and they're running the check rod, all right? So that tells me they're going for a high F number, right? And then you're following up with your machines. Must be setting a little bit fast on them because the machines are awful close to that check rod. But what I don't like about this picture, guys, I have no walls. I have no roof. I mean, in my opinion, I would not do this unless I was forced to. So, but again, shows you the method you should be seeing at the frequency you should see it, right? Again, this is what I was talking about when we were talking about moving that cream layer. This is a prime example of it. Looks really flat, but to get it as flat as he needs it, he's going to move that cream to where he needs it. So in theory, or in fact, you're skimming some of that cream off that's covering the aggregate, so when you go to polish it, you're going to hit that aggregate very quickly. This is a classic example of what not to do, all right? A few things that stand out at me, and I'll try to be quick. If I'm putting down a shake hardener, which that's what looks like they're doing, yes, you can do this, but if I'm polishing, I absolutely do not want to, because you will see these tire marks reflect through depending on what kind of polish you're doing. Because if he leaves a tire mark, if they leave footprints from walking all over the slab, you're going to fill them with cream. Looks like they're putting a shake on, so that shake's going to go in there. If you got to polish this at any type of depth, you're going to start seeing shadowing, some different things that are going to start highlighting everything that they're doing wrong on this slab. If I wasn't polishing the slab, probably be okay with some of this. I see a lot of inefficiencies here with the placement, either the re-steel or whatever. I see a lot of lines here got to be filled in with cream. It's just kind of not a real good example of how it should be done. All right. Here's a couple defects, some common ones. All right. So here you've got some, I typically call these a cat face, and I got to dial in on one. On the next slide, you got your wet cure blankets, right? They weren't put down and rolled out correctly. All of this stuff, you guys know it as a polisher, you've seen it before. These are things you need to talk about with your placement contractor to be cautious of, right? Hey, we have wheels for riders, guys. We have wheels for walk-behinds. Don't fire them up and run them across the floor, because this is exactly what you're going to end up with, scratching and gouging. This actually looks to me like they blew out a pan in their process of finishing and never refined the floor. They got on it too late. Your place finish guy should be looking at his equipment constantly and preparing for that. If you're going to have a pan that's going to break on a floor because it's wore out and it's past its service life, put a new one on before you even start. Avoid the headache, right? Okay, this is a good example of a burnish floor. This is one we actually did in our shop. So I will say it's not so much like a field floor. These guys had all day to pretty much refine this thing and make it perfect. A typical burnish floor in the field will look a little bit more like this. It's all machine finished. This placement was around, I want to say, 35,000 square feet. So again, good example of a burnish floor. If you're not looking to polish a burnish floor and you're seeing this, better start talking to somebody, because this floor is going to be very dense and very hard to cut. Okay? Typically, this is what everybody loves to see if they're polishing. All right? A nice fuzzy trowel finish. This isn't hand troweled. I would avoid hand troweling if you can, because you can get in the slider marks, knee board prints. Those trails would be hard to take out with a trowel, and when you go to crack that surface open with a polisher, you'll magnify them and you'll see them. So nice machine finish. I got an up close picture right here. You can see the consistency of it. There's no ridges, no lips, just a nice light fuzz, easy to cut. Just an all-around good finish for you. How are we doing on time? I'm checking myself here. Okay, here's the panning process, okay? So the pan machine typically breaks open the floor and gets it prepped up for the combo that's going to follow, and then the blades after that. If you're seeing this on a project, pay close attention as a polisher or a place and finisher. You don't want to see these windrolls, all right? You don't want to see this knotting in these areas where they're turning. All of this is telling me that they broke it too early. All right? And now to refine this floor, I'm going to have some issues that it's going to be challenging, right? Sometimes, hey, depending on your place finish guy, they may have to break early, depending on what they got going on. But ask the question, why are you breaking so early, right? It's going to help you get to your success. This is a good picture framing, all right? This edge right here on this placement was refined a little bit better. If you look at this edge here, you can see they got the deep compression of the trowel machines out here, but they didn't get close enough to the edge. Now, whether it's not flat here, that I couldn't tell you, or whether they just didn't refine the edge with a walk-behind edge machine that's heavy and meant to do that. You guys know what's going to happen when you polish this. This is going to be dark, this is going to be light, and you're going to have a picture frame all the way around this slab. So, things to talk about at the pre-pour. How are you doing your edges? What machinery are you using, right? You want to coordinate with that place finish guy. This is a real good picture of scratching. This, to me, I have no other way of putting it than it's just sheer laziness. If I'm going to move a trowel machine, I'm not going to drive it across a fresh slab. I'm going to either put it on wheels or I'm going to have the fork truck to move the machine. I'm going to make sure the bottom's clean, serviced, and ready to go for the next placement. This right here, if I'm a polisher, boy, I'd be probably licking my chops on what I'm going to charge that place finish guy to fix this, right? So, but hey, let's avoid it. Let's not fix it. So let's talk about curling real quick here. I'm watching my times here, and we're not talking about the sport of curling, all right? We're going to talk about slab curling. Slab curling, okay, so typically upward curling is typical on internal slabs, downward curling on external slabs, all right? Typically on your pavements. We're not going to worry about that so much. The one that we're going to fight with and deal with probably through our career is this one right here, all right? This is the one we live by on most of our placements in these buildings that are going to get polished. So here's a prime example of that picture you just saw slide back. If you look at the panel edge, see how they're curling up? If I put those four panels together, there's my curl right there. As a polisher, you got a planetary grinder coming in here, and you're going to cut across this thing nice and flat. If I have curl in these areas, I'm going to have the cut I want out here, and I'm going to have the cut I don't desire at every panel corner. All right? Also can happen on some of the panel edges. So can happen here on a slab with curl. Typically happens at the intersections when you're starting to get an abundance of curl. Flatness. How does the flatness and levelness affect polishing? It's a pretty good definition of it. Floor flatness controls the bumpiness of the floor surface and is primarily affected by the finishing operations after screeding. So keep in mind, I'm not going to read the whole definition, but FF is the place finish guy is in control of the FF once his trowel machines hit that slab. All right? What he does from there after the laser screed is all on his refinement with his trowel machines to get his higher FF numbers. The floor levelness, the FL, all right, when you talk about the FL down here, that's basically the slope of your slab, how level your slab is, all right? You put the numbers together, and I mean, you can see right here, moderately flat, flat, very flat, and super flat is anything of an FF60 or higher, an FL40. It amazes me, on a lot of these slabs, everybody wants that FF50 to polish. Hey, I can tell you just from experience, if you give me a 35 or a 45, I'm more than happy. Should be easy to polish. Don't have to shoot for the moon, because if you tell the guy you want a FF50, think about what he has to do to get there. Does he have to get a bump cutter? Does he have to do anything that's going to adversely affect you and your polish that you may not want him to do? Can you live with a 45 or a 35? Make it a little easier on him, make it a little easier on you. Right? When should you check FF and FL? So this is a big point of mine, guys, guys and gals, that I'm really passionate about. As a place finish guy, I'm judged within 24, no later than 72 hours on how flat my floor is. Right? because a lot of things happen, as you can see, right in this article here, or summary, happen with curl. Let me see here. I wrote some notes down. Basically, you want to test within 24, no later than 72, because after that, the joints and the cracks and the curls that happen in the floor, I have no control of as a place finish guy, other than, now there's control measures we put in, mixed design, you can use shrinkage, compensating chemicals, but basically things are going to happen after 72 hours, either minuscule or at a greater level that you cannot control. And we're going to get into that in the next few slides here. This is a time effects of flatness slide. And if you look at it, I poured this slab, all right, so you can see this is in a 12-month duration, poured it at a FF50, right? So say your specification on the job is your place finish guy is going to place a FF50 for the polisher, okay? Well, he's judged within 24 hours, so he placed his FF50. You come in 6 months later, you're here. You come in 12 months later, you've lost the 1/8 inch on that slab, and you're all the way down to an FF30 for polishing that slab. So keep that in mind when scheduling when you want to polish and when you can get in there and when it's most advantageous. To me, the sooner I can get in there, the better, right? At least with my diamond cuts. If they can let me in there in 14 days, give me it in 14 days. I want to get in there, get my diamonds done, protect the floor, and I'll come back and refine. But at least I'm not cutting into anything that's, curled too much where I'm going to start seeing all these rock pockets and everything else. So just always keep that in mind. You're really not going to get away from curl. And this is a good chart that shows you, hey, so take that chart, another 12 months down the road, hey, eventually it's going to level out and equal out, and there's some other things that can happen with the building that'll change it through the course, but we'd really get into a long discussion with that. Mixed designs, so I wanted to get a little bit of mixed designs in here so everyone can kind of see what you typically want to look for in a mixed design. So I'm going to get my arrow here and kind of point a few things out to you. To me, a good mixed design, all right, if you're looking for one for slab on grade, all right, this is specifically for slab on grade in a building. I want to try to get 3 blended stones. I got 4s, 57s, and 8s here. If you add up the poundage, you're always going to be around that 1,800 pounds of stone, maybe a little over, maybe a little under. You could be 1750. Just a good parameter to keep in mind on where you want to be for a well-blended mix. The stone gradation, a couple slides down, I'll show you, is how I mitigate a lot of my curl, all right? And how I get to that, 0.04% shrinkage. The stone's going to help me. My admix is going to help me. My cement content, I'm at 520. Typically don't like to go over 520 on a slab on grade. I want to stay in that wheelhouse. My sand is at 1,400 pounds. There's times I'll get down to 1,300 pounds if I'm in a manufactured sand area, because you got to remember, this is looking at the Midwest. If I'm in other areas down south, where natural sand isn't prevalent, and I need manufactured sand, do I have to blend my manufactured with natural? If I'm getting straight manufactured, all these numbers are going to change to get you to that perfect mix design. But just for this area, to give you some dialogue on what you want to look at, always look at your paste content, which would be your concrete sand and your cement, your stone aggregates and how well blended they are, that being key in any market. And then I also want to look at my percentage of air. If it's calling 2% or less, we're going to monitor it, right? We're going to test it through our placements. Typically, I never run more than mid-range. Before the mid-range, I want to show a slump of a 4 at the slump rack. After my mid-range, this one's a little bit high. It's an 8. Typically, I like to see a 6, all right? If you look at my water cement ratio, this is a key indicator, 0.48. To me, if you're a 4.8, and I can live with it, all the way to a 5 or a 5.2, depending on what market you're in, that's a pretty good mix design. If someone's coming in and they're telling you they're going to give you a 0.45, typically it's going to be a disaster, or you're going to have a whole lot of chemical and you're going to have some problems down the road. So just kind of keep that in mind. Going through another mix design here. Again, hey, different supplier, but again, if you look at a totally different supplier, where are they at? Water cement ratio 0.50. Their slump, water slump is a 4. After water reducer a 6. Just about perfect. If you look at your aggregates, your sand, I'm at 1450. I'm at 500 pounds of cement. That's really going to help me with my shrinkage because my sand and cement are down, so my paste is a little bit thinner. I'm good. Look at my blend. I got 467s, 57s, and 8s. That's a nice blended mix. If you add that up, I'm probably right around 1,800 pounds. Again, these are just things to look at when you're in a pre-pour meeting and you're asking for a mix design. Just some key things you want to kind of take a look at. All right. I believe I got one in here on slab on deck. Oh, I got to start moving here because I'm running out of time. Slab on deck. Again, slab on deck. Hey, I'm pumping, so I'm going to probably just run 1 stone, a 6A natural. My cement, I'm going to try to hold that down. Got my sand a little bit higher. All right. Again, though, this is a pumpable mix. I need to have that 3/4 and down to be able to get through my system. Water cement ratio of 4.7, slump of 4, mid-range of 6. It's a pretty good looking mix. This is a coarseness factor chart. You you should have this with every mix design that is supplied to a place finish contractor. He should always ask for his coarseness and workability chart, all right? And it'll explain these zones on my next slide on what you're looking for in this chart. I'm sorry, that's an aggregate blending chart. Again, hey, this is going to show you your percents retained. A good mix for a slab on grade, you're going to want to go 1.5 inch aggregate, and you're going to want to retain a target of at least 3%, all right? And you're going to blend your aggregates through that. This is what I really wanted to show you. When you're looking at that workability chart that I showed you 2 slides before, these are the zones. If you're in this box for slab on grade, all right, because if you look at your stone, 3/4 inch and a half, that's slab on grade. If I'm in this zone, I'm pretty good. If I'm out of the zone and I'm in zone 5, I'm too rocky. It's all stone. If I'm in zone 1, I'm gap graded. Probably don't have enough paste. It's not going to be a well workable mix. If I'm up in zone 4, I got too much paste. It's sandy. It's going to be sticky. It's going to want to move around a lot on me. So this is key to having a successful placement, is falling in this zone from your concrete supplier, right? If I get to a deck, here's a well-graded max aggregate of 3/4 inch for a deck. I'd want to fall in that zone. So you're going to want that coarseness and workability factor chart with every mix design. It's going to help you out. And this is why, all right? If you take a not so well blended, typical 1 stone large aggregate mix, because a large stone's strong and it's got a good strength factor to it, all right? Look at the amount of paste I got in there to make that all hold together. If I take a gap graded mix, right? So I got a bunch of voids in here because it's not that well blended. It's not working out for me. Again, same amount of paste. If I have a well blended aggregate mix to fill in all the capillaries and voids, I use less paste, less cement, less sand, less shrinkage, less curl, right? That's what we're trying to mitigate, is curl and shrinkage. We talked about this. Always do a mock-up slab, right? You can see the size of the slab, not real big, but they're going to do a mock-up. If I were polishing this building, I'd want to come in here and drop a polish on this and see how it cuts. We want to do our due diligence to make sure everything's working. Typically, I would do a larger mock-up with the machinery I'm always going to use. He's got to walk behind on it. I get it. Try to make the mock-up as representative as what you're going to pour with your equipment. If you're using a laser screed, do a mock-up that can handle the size of a laser screed. Does flatness matter for a polish? Well, you can see here that definitely does. There's those cream lines I was telling you about. Remember a few slides back, I showed you the guys walking all over the slab, filling things in with their cutter. When you go to polish, look at a rock, look at a cream. Flatness definitely matters, right? This one's a little bit harder to see, but you can kind of see it. If you look here, you see the haziness to it, and you see all the aggregate here. Same thing again. It's all about flatness. Another slide. This one here, believe it or not, this is one of our projects. Prior to me getting into polish, this is probably the main reason I did. This one here was just horrid choice of tooling. Yeah, a lot of reasons why this slab ended up this way, but that came more down to the tooling choice and not doing a proper pre-pouring and actually testing the cut. Surface voids. This is a cat face. This is basically, you'll see this around a lot of cold joints. It's where I've got a hotter truck or a tighter truck or a harder truck. You know, the concrete's getting harder on one side of the joint. It's a little bit more plastic state on the other. I'm trying to blend the two together, and I take the softer concrete, I put it on top of the hard, and I try to work it in. I'm going to end up with a cat face, and a cat face is going to be a slight deviation. This is usually like a 32nd or under, lower than the profile around it. Very hard to get rid of. I think a polisher's nightmare if you ask me. This, we're getting into some craze cracking. This happened on a project where it was 20 degrees outside. We had some major roof units blowing directly on the slab inside. If you look closely, you can see the craze cracking, mainly in these areas where the heat was blowing so hard on it that it sucked all the hydration out of it, and we ended up with some craze cracking on the surface. The only way to get rid of it is to cut through it. It's not that deep, but you're going to see aggregate, right? Here's another example of craze cracking, a little bit more blown up in the picture. Again, you know, very small, microscopic. I'm sure you guys have seen this out there. Byproducts, lime cements, some other things can add to this or make it worse, but they want to give you a look at it. This isn't craze cracking. This is a larger crack. This was poured in an atrium in the middle of the summer with no type of ventilation or cooling for the slab. And the slab surface, these cracks ended up about 1/8 to 1/4 deep. They didn't penetrate the slab, but the slab actually got like peanut brittle on top because of how fast it hydrated during the process on the surface. This is another example of a poor refinement from a rider. There's the zipper I'm talking about. Saw cuts too early. Just some bad finishing measures. What does success look like? Hey guys, this is the team that you saw in that earlier slide from the pre-pour. This placement behind them, that's what they did in a day. There's success right there, you know. It's time for questions and answers, right?
Thank you. We'll now begin the audio question and answer session. If you have a question, please press star, then 1 on your touch-tone phone. If you wish to be removed from the queue, please press the pound sign or the hash key. There'll be a delay before the first question is announced. If you're using a speakerphone, you may need to pick up the handset first before pressing the numbers. Once again, if you have a question, please press star then 1, or you could ask questions via the web. Standing by for questions.
I got a couple coming through here online. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I've got one from Clark. Does fiber affect gloss? That's a tough one, pending on the dosage and pending on the fiber. Typically, I do not see that, all right? Could it? You'd have to have a pretty high dose of fiber to actually affect the gloss, and you'd almost be taking over the cement content or the aesthetics of the slab at that point. So, no, typically I would not say fiber affects gloss, in my opinion. Let's see here. Temperature and moisture of gradients of subgrade will also affect concrete setting. Absolutely. Absolutely. I got one from Rich here. Fibers in polished concrete. I guess I don't understand the question. Rich, if you're still there, if you want to enlighten me on that a little bit more.
Rich, you can press star 1 if you'd like to enter the queue.
I got one here from Michael, so I can go on to Michael and then jump back to Rich's. Michael, what is the best approach to grinding metal fibers? Well, I mean, depending on what you're looking for, typically, we use a lot of steel fiber. I mean, we've used multiple brands. Don't really treat it any different. I look at my cut. I'm typically gonna, if I'm going for a sand polish, depending on the, what my Mohs test tells me and my, initial cut. Again, with the test pour, I'm probably going to start at a 25 or a 70 diamond and then transition out of that. But again, hey, it depends on what you're getting to. Haven't had a problem grinding metal fibers at all. You'll hear about, horror stories of pullouts and pop-outs and what they do to your equipment. Haven't really seen it. Yes, you will get a pop-out here and there for fibers laying flat on the surface, but if your placement guy did it right and ran the roller on them like he should and gave you the cream to work with, should be no different than polishing any other slab. I hope that helps. Rich, acceptable or not? So fibers in polished concrete, acceptable. We do it all the time. Again, cautious of what you're doing with it. If you're using a macro fiber, a heavy synthetic, probably stay away from any type of cream polish because it's going to look like you threw hay in the top of that slab. It's not going to be very attractive. So if you're doing like a surface polish, I'd probably go with like a steel fiber or, hey, drop back down to re-steel or mesh. All right. Brian, I got one here. What concerns should we have when polishing lightweight concrete on a metal deck? Oh boy. So I'll be honest with you, Brian. Poured a lot of lightweight on metal decks. Polishing lightweight on metal decks, I haven't done a lot of it. I have not. Would love to have some answers on that for you in the near future. But from everything I've heard, yes, I'd be concerned with lightweight. Lightweight aggregate is very porous and very soft. So your approach should go that way with the polishing. If I were going to polish lightweight, I would definitely do a mock-up, and I would mad scientist that thing to death on how I want to cut it to be most productive and wait to the side of caution when cutting. So, but hey, just remember, lightweight aggregate, depending on what you're using, very porous, very soft. All right. I hope that helps. Oh, let's see, what do we got here? Jeff Claude, mock-up should drive to achieve to get a B grade. Don't be too surgical. Mock-up to simulate larger square footage. Yeah, say that's a great point, Jeff. So Jeff's basically saying, hey, don't make your mock-up your Picasso, all right? I would purposely, and we do this a lot, we'll purposely throw a flaw in there, especially on a job that we're polishing. I just did one about a month ago, and the polisher came out and said, hey, I want you to put me a crack there, put a bump in there, and put throw a cigarette butt in there. So we're going to show them how we're going to deal with all that. Don't make it pretty. Make it realistic because you're going to live with it, and show them the defects and show them how you fix the defects. Hey, that's a great point there, Jeff. Excellent point. Okay, Rich, going back to you guys, and I'm trying to go through these as quick as I can. I apologize. Rich Gardner, going back to you, got lots of polishing guys not wanting fibers and slabs, microfibers. Hey, Rich, if you can talk to me offline, get my number. We can walk through that one in great detail. Have polished both. There's some means and methods that your placement guy is going to want to do depending on what you're polishing that's really going to help you through that. I have polished some macro fiber slabs and have not had any problems with them. But again, it's got to be placed properly to be polished properly. All right. So it could be part of your placement problem. That's why you're having a problem polishing. I hope that helps. Michael, what tooling approach to edge grinders curling floor? Ooh, well, I mean, there's a lot to that. I mean, hey, you're edge grinding a curled floor. Are you doing it by hand? Are you using an edge grinder? Is the edge grinder set up right? That's going to be really difficult because you're not going to know how your curl's running in that floor. Typically, a curled slab, if I know there's curl there, and I know there's a lot of curl there, and I'm trying to avoid aggregate, I'm probably going to get after that thing, going after it on my hands and knees with a hand grinder. Because if I got a good grind guy on the edge, he's going to be a little more experienced with it and not cut right into it and just expose a bunch of aggregate. I hope that helps in what you're looking for, Mike. Janice, hello. Could you share your experience with steel fiber reinforcement concrete? How do you manage expectations regarding potential exposure to the surface? Okay, so hey, I've poured steel fiber probably since the, oh boy, I'm going to date myself a little bit here, but I'll say late 80s, early 90s, so a lot of experience in it. Learned the hard way how to deal with it and control it. And then polishing came into the market and had to relearn everything again. So yes, there is some ways to mitigate the exposure of the fiber on the surface, and you're going to want to take care of it on the placement end. All right, on the polish end, you really don't have any way, shape, or form of limiting the exposure because the canvas has already been served up to you. So when you're talking about a steel fiber floor, steel fiber reinforcement, you really want to have a good long sit down with your place finish guy. Make sure they're using that roller bug. Make sure they're using that edge tamp, because there's a misconception that you're going to knock the fiber down and it's useless. No, I'm just bringing more cream up that I can polish to keep that fiber at bay and keep it covered. But the integrity of the fiber and the purpose it's there, it's all still there. It's doing exactly what it should be doing. All right? I hope that helps. Going down. Okay, Michael, how do you keep steel from the top becoming exposed, which potentially causes rust spots? If you're talking steel fiber, boy, you shouldn't really have rust spots with steel fiber because, I mean, you should be, densifying that slab and everything else to make it pretty impenetrable. If you're talking rust spots with wire mesh or something else, you don't want it by the surface. How do you keep steel from the top becoming exposed, which potentially causes rust spots? Yeah, steel fiber should not be rusting on you unless you got a lot of moisture in that slab. It could be a bad choice from the owner. Let's see what Mike says on the next one here. Or is this due to cheap steel? Again, Mike, is that? Oh, that's Michelle. I'm sorry. I apologize. I don't know what fiber you're using. Again, if you want to, hey, contact Jill with Ascc, get my number. Guys, again, if I run out of time on all this, love to talk to any of you at any time. Just get with Jill on my number. Jill, consider using concrete sensors in the plastic concrete to accurately determine concrete strength to provide the polishing contractor an accurate strength per slab. Yeah, we've used sensors in a lot of our slabs to monitor the strength, the maturity of it, and everything else. That's a great point, Jill. Sensors are becoming more and more prevalent in the industry here for more than just mass concrete. So that's a great point. Great point on that, Jill. Got another one here. Hard-capped trowel is the most popular floor to take down to New York City. Do you have a special tool or approach when first starting? Bush hammer, cap cutters, etc. Oh boy. Yeah, there's a lot of things you can do if you have when you call a hard cap trowel. I'm assuming you're calling a burnished slab a hard cap trowel. Yeah, there's a lot of things you can do to break that thing open. I hope that helps.
I just want to give an update that we have no audio questions at the current time.
Okay. Guys, hey, I appreciate everything, and sorry if I didn't get to all your questions. Jill has my email if anybody has any further questions or any type of discussion for after this. So I do appreciate all the good feedback, and thanks again.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This concludes today's conference call. Thank you for participating, and you may now disconnect.